All right, cool.
Hey guys, I hope you're good. We are with Mantissa today for a super cool live about 3D motion graphics and Blender.
Hey guys, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here, so hopefully we can make it something cool today.
Yeah, that's super cool to have you. So today we will do a short interview and you will answer some of the questions that the community can have, and also you will do a short tips breakdown, like, right?
Yeah, I'll attempt to break down the images in the thumbnail. So I did a couple of faces with fluid sims in Blender, and I'll just go over my process. I don't know if I have enough time to go into super detail, but I'll try and fit in as much as I can. So.
Yeah, so hi everybody in the chat. You can ask like any question. We will take time to answer, and I think you can have question because Midge works on Blender, and that's pretty uncommon on this channel because most of the people we had worked on Cinema 4D. So that's cool to have a Blender guy.
I try. It's definitely interesting. I get a lot of comments like on Instagram and stuff. A lot of people would be like, "Oh, C4D and Octane, C4D and Redshift," and I always find it fun. So it means to me it shows that my work does measure up to what's being done with Cinema 4D and what's sort of, I guess, par for the industry. So that's always nice to see.
Yeah, nice. So Anchor is asking, how long are you guys streaming for? We just start the streaming, so
I recognize his name. He's been in some of my streams as well. I know mine tend to go on for sometimes 2 hours, but I don't know if that's going to be the case today. I'll leave that up to you.
yeah, so maybe we can start by doing your presentation. So who are you?
Who am I? All right. Well, so my name's Midge. I'm a motion designer. I currently work as a freelance motion designer. I'm based in Antwerp, Belgium, and I've sort of been all over the place when it comes to 3D. So I finished college. What is it, like 8 years ago at this point, and I've been working ever since as a 3D artist. I started out as a visual effects artist and went into motion graphics after that, did a lot of corporate motion graphics, so a lot of more internal work for larger companies. I also did a few years of architectural visualization, so yeah, I've sort of been all over, and I always end up back with motion graphics because I really enjoy making weird stuff on my computer when it comes down to it. But I guess it's a good a motivation as any. So.
Nice. So one of the main question that I have, and maybe that some people in the live can have, is why Blender?
That's a question I get a lot.
Yeah.
And I've told this story before on my channel, but I'll tell it again here. So basically, a couple of years ago, it's 3-4 years ago now, I was at a point where I was gonna start doing something else, and I really wanted to push going freelance, and I started looking at some other software packages. So I used 3ds Max before this, and I didn't really agree with the way Autodesk were handling licensing and stuff. A lot went down in the last few years. So I started looking at other packages basically, and I tried out pretty much everything. I reinstalled C4D because I learned that in school way back when, and I used to play around with it when I was younger as well. And I liked it, but I kept trying stuff. I tried Maya, I tried Modo, I tried Lightwave, and after all that, I really enjoyed a certain type of workflow in 3ds Max with a modifier stack. And after I tried everything, I realized that's right, I totally forgot about Blender. And I installed it and tried it for about 2 weeks, and I was sold. So yeah, it's pretty cool. The original consideration was obviously Blender is free, so that's something that you can't really look past. But there were other motivations as well. I felt like 3ds Max wasn't really go in the direction that I felt I needed it to go. And yeah, I mean, I came for the free software and I stayed for the community, if I'm honest. The people from the Blender community are really cool people, and that has dragged me completely into it. And now for the last couple of years, like I've switched to an open source pipeline almost exclusively. So for about 95% of the time, I run everything on Linux. I run Blender, I use GIMP, I use Kdenlive to edit, and other various open source applications. So it's pretty cool making the transition and sort of seeing how certain things change. And so some things are a bit easier, other things are a bit harder. But when it comes down to it, if you know your 3D package, you can still make stuff, and you have to get a little creative if you're limited. So I noticed that for me with Blender, the moment I switched, I didn't understand half the tools. I was searching for stuff a lot in the beginning, but ultimately it made me more creative because I was limited with what I could do, and had to get smart about how to work around it or figure out what the tools are in Blender to do similar things. So.
Yeah, we have Rikulza telling us that the licensing is garbage.
Licensing, yeah. So that's something I definitely noticed. Not having to deal with license servers and that kind of thing is honestly pretty liberating. It seems like such a trivial thing, but the last couple of years, sometimes I'll try and use other proprietary tools if a job really needs it, or if a client asks me to use something really specific. I still have a second computer with Windows on it just in case. But more and more I'm able to do everything within Blender. And also, as my career evolves, I guess, the kind of jobs I get evolve. So where I used to be a very small part of a production, I now tend to do almost everything, and I just deliver final images or final videos. And that leaves me to sort of figure out my own pipeline, and that's pretty cool. So I've got the luxury of being able to control a lot of the stuff from my work towards the client. But yeah, the cool thing is, like, a lot of stuff still runs on Linux. So if I wanted to use Houdini, I could still use it. If I wanted to use something like RealFlow, for example, also has a Linux client. So some of those things are some of the applications that, if I really need them, I can still use them on Linux, which is really nice.
I had the feedback from Simon Almeida.
Yeah, he switched as well. I had a conversation with him about it last year sometime.
Yeah, we drank a beer in London, and he told us that he just moved. He moved from Windows 10 to Linux because it's more stable, and also he noticed that he have a redshift that is more efficient in Linux. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, actually the two main things that ended up pushing me to Linux, aside from just being interested in open source and Linux in general, was one, Windows 10 and the whole forced updates. And I've had so many issues in the first 6 months that I was using it. Like, I would be editing something in Premiere and it would update my graphics drivers in the background. Premiere would crash and I would lose everything because I hadn't saved yet and it wasn't auto-saving. And like, I got so sick of dealing with that kind of thing, it almost drove me there. And the second thing was that Blender rendered slightly faster in Linux than it did in Windows. And I'm sure with everybody here, having to render stuff and rendering animations, every second counts that you can shave off. So it was worth for me investigating the other side. And again, I came out of it. It's like, it just very much vibed with the way I think. And yeah, I stuck with it, and it's working for me at the moment, so I'm pretty happy.
So that's a mentality, nice mentality, because I see that you also share resource on your website, and I see that everything is under public domain license.
Yeah, exactly.
That's really cool, because I just discovered that you do this kind of stuff because you do not promote it so much on your social medias, right?
No, I like to keep the social media just for work. I'll mention it every now and then if I have something that might be of interest to a lot of people. But in general, one of the reasons I gravitated towards making them public domain is that I felt that if I make a bunch of stuff and it's just sitting here on my hard drive, what's the point? Like, why did I make it? Why, if I can only use it every now and then? I don't really believe in secrets. I think everybody has their own little, little tips and workflows and resources and things. And I really enjoy sharing it with other people because maybe that's because of the teaching I've done over the years. I really like working with students as well, and just sort of helping people reach that moment where they're like, oh, cool. So if this works that way, or if you can use this, then, all the different puzzle pieces seem to fall into place. And like suddenly you get this cascade of all these things that come together and you start seeing the big picture on how to do certain things. So, if one of my random tree models that I made years ago can help somebody figure something out that they haven't figured out before, that's pretty cool,
Yeah, I also see that you have a bunch of VG loops on your website,
Yeah.
and it's super cool. And my question is, you told me earlier that Andrew Kramer is like one of your mentor, but also I see some. Is that coming from Beeple, the VG loop sharing?
Yeah, I guess it definitely influenced me. The thing is, the reason I made those 60 loops was for a specific project, was for a personal project, an event that we hosted. And I've been a fan of Beeple's stuff for a while, and I mean, like most motion designers, I guess you can see a lot of influence from his work in a lot of ours. But yeah, it was sort of the same thing. It's like, okay, so now I have these 60 VJ loops, and either I can hoard them and try to sell them and do stuff, but it's not really me. So I was just like, just use them. I don't care. The source files are there as well if people want to do other stuff. And public domain just makes it easier, so people don't have to ask for attribution. They can just use it any way they want. And ultimately, I think most of the people that I know that have used them, because I have, it provides me with work, for example. So sometimes I get DJs from all over the world that are like, hey, I use your VJ loops, I think they're really cool. I'd like to have my own branded ones sort of in between. So it gives people a place to start, and then they maybe buy a couple of loops from me that I make specifically for them, that obviously that are theirs, that they can put in between. And it's a cool middle ground because their shows already feel personalized, but at the same time they have enough content to keep it interesting. And that's happened a few times now, and I think the general response of the community has been really nice. And yeah, I mean, it's cool. I love sharing stuff because I love seeing what other people do with it as well. So it's always really interesting to see where it ends up and who ends up using them too. So.
Yeah, some people asked in the live chat if we will have time to do critics on some Blender work. I think we will not have enough time this time because we will do like a small breakdown. But maybe you will be welcome another moment on the channel. Maybe to do a critique my work or something like this. It can.
Oh yeah, I'd be more than happy to, for sure. So.
Yeah, it can be an idea. So yeah, I see a lot of great quality content, and that's nice to see everything under Creative Commons. Is that Creative Commons, right? Or
public domain, you mean, or?
No, that's public domain. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I guess it's sort of part of, but public domain basically means I relinquish all copyright. So it's anybody's to use for anything. So I've even had a studio, for example, call me and they're like, yeah, we'd really like to license your clips. And I'm like, well, they're free. You can use them for anything, even for commercial stuff. So go nuts. They're like, yeah, but we feel really weird not paying for it. And it was funny because that response then turned into like, well, you know what? If you make money on the job that you use these for, then we'll make a deal. You can buy me a plane or a train ticket to London, and I can come visit you guys or something like that. And that goes over really well because for me, it's more. I'm more interested in building up good relations with people and with clients all over the place, and I believe work will come from that rather than always trying to put the work first and trying to put money first. Yeah, like I said, it's not that money isn't important. Obviously, you have to pay bills as well, but I think having a good rapport with potential clients and people that you've been working with for a long time is definitely more important. And we'll make sure that the other stuff is easier in the long run. So.
Okay, we have a small audio problem. Like you have a louder sound than me. That's
okay. I can turn mine down a little bit. I know my mic's pretty high at the moment. So.
Yeah, I think that's it. And that's live, guys. Every time we do lives, we have small issues. We try our best. But
hopefully this is a little better. I turn it down just a little bit. If I need to turn it down more, just let me know.
Let us know in the chat if it's better. And okay, that's really nice to see all this work and the great mentality that you have, because I think it's more and more important. And now in the internet era, the era of sharing and
yeah, things have changed significantly. I mean, I remember when I was first starting out, I was always really amazed by the openness of the 3D community in general, and I think that's only exploded even further, and especially with stuff like Instagram, which is nice. That definitely changed a lot, I think. Just being able to put the focus on the work rather than, a post with a bunch of text and stuff. That's one of the reasons I really gravitated towards Instagram, is because it's just about the work. Here's the image, and
Yeah.
Okay, I'll turn mine down a little bit. I sound worse. Dang it.
Oh,
yeah, it's a bit echoey in here. I forgot to put up some sound dampening stuff, so that's my fault.
A little noisy, yeah. We tried our best. Yeah, and I think you can share everything with people, but you will not share your creativity with people. So if people download your projects, they will learn. But
yeah.
I think what's make an artist is just his own heart and creativity. So I think that's not a problem to share assets and creativity.
No, and I think that even has a secondary effect where if I'm sharing all the tricks that I'm using, I'm forced to become better.
Yeah, right.
Like I'm forcing myself to find new things, find new ways to be creative, and I think that's a really important part for me as well. Is there's an element of self-development there, so which is interesting.
Yeah, also by doing like a tutorial, you also learn better what you've done. If you are able to explain it, that's kind of
yeah, similar to what I had with Blender when I switched at first. That you're forced to sort of reevaluate how you do things and what the core ideas of how you approach things. So it's really cool.
Yeah, I see really, really nice thing. I'm super excited to see the breakdown.
Cool.
And yeah, a lot of details. That's super cool to see this. I had a question in mind, but I just forget it.
That's okay.
Yeah, so you have a YouTube channel for all the people that not knowing you yet. So you do tutorials?
Yeah, I do tutorials and streams. I've been streaming a bit more lately, although it comes with a giant disclaimer. I'm not aiming to be like a YouTuber or a streamer, so updates are very irregular. I'll have moments where I have a lot of free time, and again, it depends on how busy I am with client work and stuff as well. If I have a bit more free time, I'll stream and I'll try and record some tutorials. So yeah, sometimes there's like a month or two in between content, but I'm always open for suggestions as well. The stuff that I've done now, I'm pretty proud of, and I've received some really, really nice comments on it, which is really cool. So.
Yeah, one thing that I notice is that the community is like really active on Blender. That's a really nice.
Very much so. Yeah, the interesting thing about the Blender community, and that's something that I noticed the first time I went to the Blender conference, is it's extremely varied. So because it's open source, it also gets used in a lot of other sort of non-traditional media and entertainment 3D spaces. So there's a whole science and medical side to people using Blender for visualizations and other things as well. So it's always really interesting when you go there. the kind of people that you meet is extremely varied. I mean, I've talked to, from talking to other artists that work in animation studios to, doctors in university hospitals, astrophysicists that came to explain how two really obscure features in Blender ended up getting in there because of some research that they did and they wanted to visualize it. So that is really, really cool. And there's a really giant 3D printing community as well that uses Blender, I think. So it's cool. I'm excited. I'm sure people can tell at this point.
Yeah, so Ripoludza is telling us that he used it inside his engineering job and printing. That's really nice.
There you go. Cool.
That's nice. I don't know any guy that print stuff coming from C4D, but maybe some dudes already made it. One guy asked if you will do another lesson like your cloud course.
I'm depending on how scheduling and everything works out. Hopefully there will be more stuff like that. Obviously it depends on the Blender people as well. They're extremely busy right now with the new version, but hopefully I'll be able to go talk to them soon and figure something out. So.
Another question is, do you use Python and OpenCV?
Not yet. I know of it. I've looked into it a little bit, but I haven't used it much yet. I do, when it comes to computer vision and stuff, I'm not very well versed in it right now. The only thing that really comes close is photogrammetry. But that's one of the few proprietary applications that I still use, which is Photoscan. But more and more I want to start moving towards it. But for me, again, it's a time thing. By the time that I'm good enough at Python, I have to figure out, to be able to learn Python in a sustainable way, obviously. And I really enjoy doing what I do now. But it's on my radar. I think a lot of that stuff is going to be very, very interesting for the future. Like I saw an artist on Instagram a while back who tries to grab like different videos and stuff and tries to use machine learning to generate new visuals from that. And things like that I find really, really fascinating. I'd love to try and do a project where, for example, I could feed it all of my work and see if I can get a computer to sort of make stuff in my style. That would be really fascinating to watch, see if it would be possible at all. I don't know if machine learning is there quite yet, but it could be cool to try something like that out. So if there's people out there that know about this stuff and are looking for an artist to work with, I'm always interested. So they can always hit me up or let me know.
We have a question about third-party renderers. So what do you use? What I think you're using cycles, right? But did you run Octane or stuff like this, or do you make everything with cycles?
Yeah, so the rendering scene in Blender is sort of interesting. I use cycles all the time. It's built in. It's so beautifully integrated into Blender. I really enjoy the way it works, and it's interesting to see the development and be able to be a part of it as well a little bit and test stuff early. The main issue with third-party renderers in Blender is that because Blender is licensed under the GPL, which is a copyleft license, it means that all this stuff that needs to be plugged into Blender, the Blender license states that it has to be GPL as well. It's basically a way to protect things that are added into Blender and keep them open source, but it does make it harder for third-party renderers to integrate. So there are a number of them that do it, and they all do it differently. So V-Ray is the first example that I'm going to use, and the way they work, I believe Corona as well, they use a bridge that's written by somebody from the community. I think in Corona's case it is. I'm not sure about the V-Ray one. I don't know if it's an official thing or if it's a community thing. But basically you use a standalone renderer and it exports your scene to the standalone renderer and then renders it in there and then brings it back into Blender. It's not the easiest workflow, but if you're used to V-Ray and you have a license, it's one way of doing things. Octane is a little bit different. They have their own Blender version that you download. So to be able to do the integration properly, they take Blender, they change a bunch of internal stuff because they can, they have the source code, and then they put out their own Blender version to which Octane plugs in really nicely and has really cool integration. The only issue with that is sometimes they're on a version that's a little bit older, so maybe it's the last version and you don't always have the latest, features and whatever Blender features. But that's generally the two ways that it's done. Most of the open source renderers are integrated quite well. So there's like Lux Render as well, which had a bit of a reboot recently, which has OpenCL support and can do hybrid rendering and stuff as well. But I just use Cycles because it's included. It keeps getting better, and yeah, I mean, some of the people working on it have worked on a lot of the bigger name renderers like Arnold or Octane and things, and some of the knowledge that they have seeps through, and they get to figure out a cool way to do similar things in Cycles, which is really nice.
Yeah, we have a few more questions. So, did you try the Eevee?
Yes, I'm messing about with Blender 2.8, but right now there's a few things still missing that obviously it's still in development, so it does crash a lot still, but I've done some fun Eevee tests. I think it's going to be cool. For certain motion graphics jobs, it's going to be pretty interesting. I think a lot of people are going to be looking at it at least just to try and give it a go, because I believe there's something like URender for C4D, sort of a similar type of real-time render coming out. But it's really cool just playing with it and having like a proper, like a viewport that can handle quite a number of things is incredibly cool. So I'll do stuff with it in the future, but yeah, I'm still missing too much to try and dive into it completely. So it's more playing around right now than really doing stuff with it. So.
And are you into Redshift? Did you try it? Or?
It's like one of the few renderers that I've never tried. I used to try all of them. I used to love trying all these different renderers. But since I switched to Blender, there's no, as far as I know, there's no Redshift version for Blender yet. I know they were talking about it, but I don't know if that actually became a thing. So yeah, it's one that I've looked at a lot because it seems like really interesting technology, sort of bringing together, both strengths of the two types of renderers that have been around for the last number of years, but unfortunately haven't been able to try it yet.
And that's a personal question, but what's the amount of post-production on your image? Some image looks like really raw, and some looks to have a bit more post. So are you using Blender for post, or what do you use?
So like a lot of people, I used to use After Effects, and obviously when I switched to Linux, After Effects was no longer an option. And I think from all of the applications that I used to use on Windows, that's still one that I miss the most, just because I used it for God knows how long, like since I was a teenager, long time ago. But yeah, right now for post-production, I just use the Blender Compositor. It's definitely not the most, how should I say this in a friendly way? It does what it needs to do, and it does it well. It's not super fast, but I think it's still got a lot of potential. I like it because I like the workflow of being able to render something and then immediately within the same application just start to be able to manipulate that image. So it has changed my workflow quite a bit in that nowadays, rather than rendering like an EXR sequence with a bunch of channels and stuff, because I do the compositing in Blender, when I hit render and render an animation sequence, it renders the frame, it does the compositing, and then it saves it out. So it saves me quite a number of round trips between different applications, and that I found really interesting. And I'm willing to deal with some of the limitations here and there of the Blender Compositor just for that ease of use and speed of workflow. Like it's kind of crazy how much Blender has replaced for me a lot of these different applications that now come together, and I just do it in one. So, and it depends. Sometimes I'll do a lot of post-production, sometimes very little. Sometimes I'll try and save a bad render and then realize that no matter how much post-production I'm going to put into it, it'll never look good. Yeah, mostly just Blender Compositor. Like, I think especially on Instagram, let's say 90% of the images that you see is pretty much all Blender start to finish. So maybe some texturing in GIMP here and there, but I love doing stuff procedurally as well. So even that is very, very little. So
Nice. We have few more questions, and then I think
yeah.
we can jump in the breakdown. I have one or two personal questions. So I see that you have a lot of taste in lighting and photography. Do you have a personal influence? How do you learn it, and do you have personal tips for the people watching to improve their composition or photography?
Sure. I ever since I was a kid, my dad was like a heavy movie buff. Well, from when I was a pretty young age, we used to have a lot of movies in the house, and I used to watch a lot of like Hollywood movies, especially. So I grew up watching stuff like Terminator and all that kind of thing, and Alien, and you name it. And so I've always been super drawn to it, and I think my interest in 3D was sort of one part that, and another part which I've never really talked about, and it's kind of funny, but because I was sitting at a computer all day, I wanted to make cool wallpapers because I wanted to decorate my computer. So I started out in Photoshop and stuff like that, and then later on I was using like Poser and Bryce way back when I was a teenager to do stuff, and it evolved from there. And I've always been a huge movie buff, so I have multiple screens set up, but usually when I'm working, and that's very much a freedom that I have as a freelancer, one of my screens has a movie or a show going somewhere. And I generally try to use that to my advantage. So, for example, if I'm working on like super sci-fi stuff, I'll watch sci-fi movies all day because it just gets you in the right mindset, and that's really cool. So that to me helps a lot, and yeah, I get so much inspiration from movies. It's definitely a thing. So to improve, because of my interest in movies and cinematography and photography in general, that has always helped me a lot. Learning how to do stuff in the real world, especially the last few years. Physically based rendering has just been completely exploding. And that coming from that angle does help a lot, knowing what that does. Like I studied photography for a while as well, and I remember lighting my own photos, like developing and lighting my own photos in a dark room, and then using all these tools like this little paper circle on a stick that you use to brighten up parts of your image. And then I realized, well, I've been using Photoshop now for so long, and I know the dodge tool. It's the dodge tool. I think it's the dodge tool. It's like a little stick with a little circle on it. It's because you use that when you're lighting stuff in photography, when you're lighting like your final image on the photography paper. And I find that to be really interesting because it means that even a really old book about optics and cinematography and techniques, it's even that stuff is still really relevant because we're still dealing with it today, and all the technology that we're building to recreate this stuff is based on the same laws of physics and sets of rules. So I think that could be really good to look into. Cinematography is incredibly fascinating, and it's taught me a lot to learn how to analyze some of my favorite films, and in order to sort of understand why I like them and why some of that is being replicated, maybe not as good in my work and hopefully better in the future, but that for me is sort of my main source of inspiration.
Yeah.
So I hope that answered the question. That was maybe a bit rambly. Sorry.
Yeah, I think it can help people, and that's nice to see that you have all this background. Some people complain a bit about the sound.
I'll turn mine down a little bit more.
I think also because I have your sound going into my speakers. But last time when we made the live with Matthew and Sina, when I put my headphones, the sound just was not here. So every live is dealing with a new problem.
Yeah, I've noticed that now on streams as well. I haven't had too many technical issues just yet, but I hope I can keep that going.
Yeah, I will probably buy soon a new mic and stuff, but that's a bit strange. So maybe we can jump into screen share and see your Blender. Sure. Maybe you can show some stuff. So I will disable my head, but I will still be here to
Cool.
to speak. Let's see, where is Skype? It's right there. And for all the people, be sure to check the links under the description. You have everything. You have the website, you have the Instagram, you have the YouTube channel, and I think oh, so someone said don't ignore my question. Okay, sorry, I'm actually not ignoring your question. I'm just focused on the live. So your question was, what are your specs, Mantissa?
My specs. I think I get this question every live stream. So there's a good story attached to that. So when I switched to Blender, one of the first things I did was, it was at a time when 3ds Max was going subscription, and I told myself, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try and use Blender for like 6 months or a year, and the $200 that it costs me, I'm going to set aside every month, and if I make it through the year, I'm going to buy myself something really cool. And it worked out. I ended up with quite a bit of money saved at the end of the year, and I bought 2 Maxwell Titanexes. Secondhand, so previous generation Titanex, which is still running in a different computer. And that really got me rendering. Like, GPU rendering is really cool, and I've known about it for a long time, but obviously you don't always have the cash. GPUs are extremely expensive right now as well. And that was 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. And then recently I built a new machine with a Threadripper CPU, so 16 cores and 64 gigs of RAM, which I'm hopefully planning to expand at sometime soon if the prices drop. And this machine has 4 GPUs, so it has 1 Titanex as the display, and then 3 water-cooled 1080s as sort of the render cards. So I hope that answers the question. But again, you know, it's the money that I'm saving on software is allowing me to keep my prices reasonable and still have enough left over to build a cool computer to keep it going. So
nice. Maybe you can start your breakdown. I think people.
Yeah.
Wait.
No worries. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open some of the images first, and then we'll see where are they. Actually, data portfolio. I think they're in here somewhere, so if I can show these. So, no, not GIMP. I'll open them with something else. All right, there we go. So the images are the ones in the thumbnail. So basically, it's a very similar process for these 5 images, and if you want to have a good look at them, check them on the website or on Instagram as well. But basically, the idea is a human face and some nice, cool sims going on in there. So I'm just going to go through some of the tools that I've used. Like I said, we were talking before the stream, obviously, and I said it would be nice if I could do a full one, but it's going to take too long. So I'm going to show you all the tools that I've used and sort of the workflow of bringing them together. And it all starts with a human. And the cool thing is there's a Blender add-on, and that's something that's really fun about Blender as well. A lot of the add-ons tend to be free. So I'll see if I can show it real quick. So I'll show the website real quick for people. So there's this dude called Manuel Bastioni. He worked on Make Human as well, if I'm correct. I'm not 100% sure, but he provides a free plugin for Blender to create human-based meshes. So they're fully rigged and stuff, which is absolutely amazing. So I can choose whatever. I'm just going to leave it to the default Caucasian female. I can hit init character, and I forgot to turn off some of this stuff, so I'll undo real quick. You can use cycles materials, but I'm going to throw out the studio lights. So that immediately gives me a character. So that makes things really easy. Yeah, I mean, I think in the Cinema 4D community and Adobe community, there's a lot of people that use the Adobe ones, if I'm correct. Adobe has something built into Creative Cloud with like animatable characters and stuff. And this is basically the free sort of Blendery version of that, I guess. So let's see. Yeah, you can change different types and things. I'm not going to go through this because this is something you can have a look at home, but I'm just going to finalize it and let's see. I don't want to save the images. I just want to finalize this. So that's the first thing I do is just make sure I have a mesh. Ah, yeah, somebody's saying Mixamo. That's what I meant. I think that's one of the more commonly used ones. All right, so she's done, almost. There we go. So now I actually have a fully rigged character that I can use really easily. So that's really cool. So I'll do some work to this to get it ready for the simulation. So in Blender, I use the Blender particle system, and and this is pretty funny, but it's actually just a bone and not a nickel. So, so I use the Blender particle system, and it has fluid particles built in, so you can do some cool stuff with it. And I know from experience that I'm gonna have to scale this up. So generally what I'll do, just to be really quick, is grab this mesh and make sure it's somewhat smooth and just export it as an OBJ, just so I can re-import it. If I want to re-edit it and try stuff, then I still have the old version to fall back on. So I'm just going to throw that in there and make sure apply modifiers, and I don't want anything else. There we go. And then I can leave that model and the rig in here, so that way I can change it afterwards if I need to. And the reason I sometimes do this is sometimes you just want the mesh, and if I want to try and collapse that mesh down with the rigging and everything on it, I have to remove some stuff and make sure it works, and now I just have a really easy mesh to work with. So scale this up, maybe even more, and just edit it and throw away everything I don't need. There we go. I think I might have overdone it a little bit on the vertices, but we'll see. And then very quickly, just fill up the bottom edge. Let's see if we can do this easily. Select my trait, and I believe it's non-manifold. Yeah. So that will give me all the edges that are sort of open. So that means I can very easily deselect all the ones I don't need up here. There we go. And I just fill that up. It's very simple, but it works, and it does what it needs to do. So again, I'm going to try and get this done as quickly as possible. But basically I go in and I delete everything I don't need again. So it's always really important with simulations that you use as little as possible when it comes to stuff that you need and don't need. So actually I'm going to do this differently. Sorry, I'm getting a little messed up here. Yeah, I definitely divided them too much. It's a bit slow. There we go, and now I can just hit plus. Go back a bit, maybe even a little bit more. Throw out the faces. And that way now when I go back in, I can select this internal eyeball, delete it, and I'm just left with this little shell, but that's still useful for the simulation. So when I'm simulating inside of these faces, I want to make sure everything's closed off. So generally with the mouth as well, I'll model it. I'll just make sure that it's closed off here as well. So you get one nice closed mesh so that when the simulation happens, you can actually look at how it works. And I'm not going to use this model for simulating because it's going to take too long. I just want to show you the approach, and I'll open some of the final files from the other one so you can see exactly how that worked out. So let's see. What am I doing here? I'm in the middle of somewhere. Looks like I got a little lost here. Give me a sec to see what I'm doing. There we go. Looks like my camera got all messed up. But anyway, I'm just going to show you on a basic sphere how the particle system works, and then some of the cool things you can do with it. So, like most other 3D applications, you have a base particle system, and then you can use forces to affect it. So, let's smooth this out. A very simple object to start with, and when I just hit play, everything's incredibly slow, probably because I still have these enabled. So I'm going to disable my modifiers here. There we go. And I'm just going to make this a little bit clearer as well. So go to display, velocity, and up the draw size a little bit. So this is just a very simple particle system. Again, I don't think this looks too foreign if you've worked with anything else that has particles. But the cool thing is they have fluids built in. So I'm going to set my end frame a little bit higher and set it to 25 frames, and then set it up here. So as some of you might notice, I've done this quite a number of times because I have some somewhat default values, but some things that I know just work a little bit better than the default settings. So now I have a whole bunch of particles, but I don't really want them to do anything except for being affected by the forces. So by default, they use the normals of the image, not of the image, of the mesh as velocity. So now if I spawn them, nothing really happens. They just stay there. So now I can start adding in force fields, and like any good visual effects artist will tell you, don't just add one turbulence force field, always add more than one, so you get two different variations of noise within the same scene, and that always breaks up your simulation and makes it look a little bit more interesting. So I have two separate ones now, and they're doing their thing. I can tweak them in just a minute, but the first thing I want to do is add a whole lot of particles. So let's go straight up to 250,000 and see how that affects everything. So you can already see this is giving me really interesting looks, but it's a bit too quick, and it's breaking up a little bit too quick. So this is where a good understanding of all the different facets of simulation comes in. So one of the things I want to do is pull down the drag, or up the drag rather. So this way the particles just have a little bit of drag applied to them, and then they make some more natural feeling things, natural feeling, I guess, shapes and stuff, and you can keep them together a little bit. Then the second thing I need to do is still set them to fluid. So right now they're just regular Newtonian particles, so they just use usual regular physics, and they don't interact with each other. They just use the forces in the scene. But once you'll see, once I switch this to fluid, not only are they going to explode, and there's a good reason for that, but they're going to make more interesting shapes. So one of the reasons they're exploding right now is they're too big. So there's an internal size for each particle, which Blender is using to interpolate between the different particles and give the fluid effect. So I'm going to turn this down to something I know generally works. So down here in the size, you can change the size of the particles, and now you'll see they start behaving a little bit more normal. Now you still can get some weirdness, but that basically has to do with the fact that I'm spawning too many particles for the particular surface. So because there's too many, there's particles spawning in the same place, so there's like this little collision going on, and you get a few of them that freak out. So you can do either one of two things, either bring down the size a little bit more, or just turn down the number of particles. So in my case, I think if I go from 250 to 200,000, that should work. So we're getting a little bit more stable, and you're always going to have some stuff in the beginning. And again, you can tweak this until it's perfect. So it's just a case of tweaking as always. So I still have my two noise values here, and I haven't changed anything, so I'm going to start messing with them now. The first one, I want a bigger one, which is a little bit stronger, and I'm going to change the size up to like 2 something. And the way to look at it here in Blender is if we look at the grid. I don't know how visible it will be in the stream. Maybe it's more visible here. I have kind of a dark theme going on, so let's see if I can switch that. I think this is a little bit more default. I don't know if that's much better. This is the default Blender theme. So let's go default, so hopefully it's a little bit more visible on the stream. But basically, each one of these squares is 1 by 1. So you can imagine if my particle, my turbulence field size is 2, I can get sort of swirls that are about the size of these two units, or these two grid units. So that's a good way of referencing it. And if I turn off the other one completely, we'll see, oh, not negative, but if I turn it off completely, you'll see that sort of happens once everything starts sticking together a little bit further in the simulation. You get those sort of bigger breakups. Now, one of the other things that I haven't changed yet is I want to bring up some of this stuff. I want to mess with the way the fluid actually behaves. And I've noticed that bringing up the mass slows them down a little bit, but keeps them together a little bit better, which is really nice. So that way you get something that feels a little bit more natural, and you get less of this kind of crap, I guess, flying all over the place. And you can see the effect the force already has on the fluid. So and some other stuff I like to play around with. The stiffness and the viscosity are really important. So if I bring the stiffness down, you'll get sort of more intricate shapes, interesting shapes. And then if I bring the viscosity up a little bit, the fluid will move even slower. And I've noticed to get the results that I get for the faces, I'm usually simulating like 500 frames, 750 frames, and in extreme cases with a lot of particles, even 1,000 frames. Because I just want to get those forces to move around a little bit and mess with them. So if we look at it now, you can see there's already a really big difference in how it behaves than before. And we get these really interesting and fun results. And, you know, playing with simulations is fun because you just get to, like, I always feel like I'm sitting at this giant console or like a cockpit, and I'm just twiddling things and seeing what effect they have. And that's really nice. So generally, I'll set up a few of these emitters within a face, but I'll show you the same workflow just within a cube so you can see what's going on. Actually, something like this, or maybe even a little bit smaller, just for the sake of brevity. And I can set up a collision. So, I mean, when you're looking at Blender, and even if you're a Cinema 4D person, you can see a lot of this stuff is very similar to Cinema 4D. So, setting up this collision will allow it to collide, the particles to collide with the shape. And then, for example, I'll set the draw type to bounds, so that way I can look through it at all times, and I can see the effect of the particles a little bit better. So with that going, I can mess with this as well. And this is something I really like about Blender. A number of years back, they tried to make everything as interactive as possible. So you can play with these forces while you're simulating and see the effect on them before you do your final sim. So I set this one back to 0. So I'm going to pull it back up to like maybe 1.5. And you can see it moves a little bit quicker. It might be interesting to bring the size up. So you always want like a big noise to create the overall shape, and then you want a smaller noise to sort of break it up a little bit. And depending on the shape that you want, you can mess with it. Now, another really cool thing to do is these forces, and that's something interesting about Blender in general. A lot of these things, while they seem static, the fact that this force is over on this side and this force is over on this side actually affects the way the forces are being used and spread out. So if I want to get even more variation, what I can do now is animate these helpers for the forces. So the force itself is starting to turn into a Star Wars podcast, but so the force of the object itself is actually changing as well. So that gives you even more dynamic motion within the fluid simulation. And this is sort of where, you know, my After Effects stuff meets other things. It's very easy to set drivers in Blender. So, for example, if I just want this to move up during the simulation, I can type hashtag, and the hashtag will start something which is called a driver in Blender, which is a bit like an expression in After Effects. So if I type hashtag frame, it's just going to get the current frame number, and I'm going to divide it by like 100. So if we're at frame, what is it, 260 or 270 something, you can see it's 2.73, and now it animates automatically. And now this will actually affect it as well, and I can do something similar for, let's say, the rotation. And I'm glossing over this stuff, but I just want to show people more what it can do and how I do things, rather than be very particular about one thing. So I'm going to change that box, make it a little bit smaller, just so we can see the interaction. There we go. Just let it run for a little bit. And as you can see, the shape of the simulation keeps changing because of that. You can see sort of the forces pushing it and pulling it around as they move around. And I find that stuff really to be really fascinating myself. So that's why I like working with it. And here we can see some of the first particles hitting the side and bouncing off and doing cool stuff. So you know, if you're in a pinch or on a budget and you want to learn some stuff and try some stuff, Blender is a great option, because a lot of the tools that you'll find in other applications are in here. All right, so that's looking pretty cool. Maybe I want to give it a little bit more, so we have something to work with. I'm going to add that little touch of initial velocity from the sphere as well. So I'm going to set it to like 0.25, so that way the particles, they push out a little bit and they're going to move out to the edges a little bit quicker, and we can see that collision with the box happening a little bit better. Just let it run. And the Blender particle system scales quite well with the number of cores in your computer as well, so that's good to know. If you have a really beefy CPU machine, then it's a lot of fun to use. All right, so let's let this run for a little bit and then get into actually shading and doing other stuff. Come on, come on. See if there's any more questions or anything. Okay. Okay, so let's work with this. We can work with that. We can shade it, and the workflow, I guess, will be exactly the same as with the faces, but it'll be a little bit quicker because it's slightly less particles, and it's just a box. So yeah, the faces got pretty crazy towards the end. When I was doing like millions of particles, it got a bit slow. So so the next thing I'm going to do is something very simple. I'm just going to create a simple plane, and I'm just going to go into vertex mode. I'm going to collapse it all down because I just want a single vertex. So you can't really see it because it's just a single vertex, but there's a cool thing in Blender. So the way things work in Cinema 4D, you work with hierarchies, for example. So you'll put something into a cloner object, if I remember correctly. It's been a while, and then you'll put it into an array, and then all those things work together. Blender has similar tools, but they use a modifier stack. So basically each object can have different modifiers on them, and there's a whole bunch you can use. Now for this one specifically, I use the particle instance, and what it does, it will map that mesh to each particle of your particle simulation. And I'm using a single vertex for a reason that will become clear pretty quickly. But what I can do is I can grab the round cube, and immediately you'll see it'll grab all the particles that are in that simulation. But it allows me to apply that, and now I have a single object with 200,000 vertices, which is a lot lighter than any type of simulation or anything else, and you can use this as a base to build on. So what I can do now is grab another sphere, and usually I'll do it with a cube, and then subdivide it at render time just to try and keep things as light as possible in the viewport. So I'll scale this down a little bit, and then select the cube first, and select the point cloud, I guess you could use it. It's not technically a point cloud, but it's just a vertex cloud, and then parent them together. And there's a really cool little feature here that's called dupliverts, or duplication, and you can duplicate these over these vertices. So now I can duplicate this cube over all these different vertices, which is really, really cool. So let's see. And this is where it does tend to get a little bit slow. So I'm going to scale down the cubes, but not, I'm scaling down the object instead. So I'm just going to turn this off a little bit. And this is just one of those things that's going to be slow anyway, because you have to keep in mind, even though this cube only has 6 vertices, there's 200,000 points in this mesh, so it's going to be 1.2 million vertices all of a sudden, or 1.2 million faces, so it can get a little bogged down. But luckily, even though the viewport preview gets a little slow, the render stays extremely fast because they're GPU instance, which is nice. So if we turn this on real quick, then this is going to look okay. I think once I start subdividing them down, no, actually I'm not going to scale them, it should work just fine. So I'm just going to turn them off for now and get into the second part of this, which is the actual mesh, the human mesh that I use, that I sort of mess up and decimate in interesting ways, and sort of that works together. You get this weird wireframe, and then it helps to sort of keep the shape and keep the recognition a little bit, but it encapsulates a lot of the techniques that I use. So we'll do the same thing with the cube, and it shows you a bit of the workflow that I use for that kind of thing. So I'm going to use a lot of different modifiers, and I'll go pretty quickly, but if you have any questions in the future or whatever, like a lot of this is on my YouTube channel, so check it out, and I'm always happy to help when I can. So first thing I'm going to do is subdivide this a whole bunch of times, maybe like 31 times, so we have 32 subdivisions on each end, and then I should have done this before. I'm actually going to undo it. First I'm going to split all these edges. So that means each one of these polygons is actually not stuck to the other ones, it's just separate, and the reason I do that will become clear in just a second. Now I'm going to subdivide them. Subdivide. There we go. And as some of you might have noticed, Blender is extremely keyboard focused and based. So if you don't like keyboard shortcuts, then you're gonna have a bad time. See, so now this, for the people that follow me and are here, they're probably laughing at this point. I use displace modifiers for everything. So this allows you to use a texture to display stuff. I mean, obviously it's in pretty much every 3D application. This is the crux of a lot of my workflows. So here we go. And then I can assign what kind of texture I want. I'm just going to use a distorted noise, the cell noise pattern. Bump up the size. This is going to give me a really kind of messed up mesh, but the way I'm doing this stuff, is sort of, I have an end goal in mind, and I'm using this mesh as a volume rather than a properly topologized mesh, because the next step is basically remeshing. And this is really cool because I can remesh in a number of different ways. Either you can do a sharp mesh approximation, smooth, or it can do blocks. So if you want to voxelize or pixelize something really easily, then this is going to be like your best friend. So I can choose the size, and I can even scale it up and down. But basically what this is going to do, it's going to give me this mesh that is wholly subdivided, and you know, I have these straight lines now that I can do things with, and it depends on the image I put in. So even if I change this, it's going to affect it, and like that's probably a really bad example. But you'll see, you'll get slightly more organic shapes once you start messing with the more organic noises. But I like to use this cell noise thing a lot because it works really well for like technical sort of looking patterns. So with that mesh in mind, one of the things I want to do is I want to create wireframes from this, because who doesn't love a good wireframe, right? and I want to take away some parts of the mesh. So first thing that I need to do is get rid of all these subdivisions, because if I wireframe this, I'm going to save this very quickly just in case, but here we go, come on. Yeah, so fun fact, if you simulate particles in Blender, you've got two options. Either you can simulate them to files on your disk, or you can simulate them to RAM. But that means they'll also be included in the Blender file. So this blend file is probably going to be like half a gig or something because all the particles are in there. So let's give it a second. See how big it is. Yeah, so I'm already at 1 gigabyte now. There we go. So what I'm quickly going to do is, because I've simmed and I don't need these simulation caches anymore, I'm just going to throw them out. Because it'll allow me to save the file a little bit quicker. It's down to 25 megabytes now, so that's a little bit better. So let's get back to this mesh. So again, as you would with other applications, you can keep throwing stuff on, but I like that this is procedural. So decimation, usually you use it just to decimate a mesh, but again, there's different kinds of decimation, and one of these is planar decimation. So what this will do is it will actually grab all the planar parts of my mesh, and then it basically removes all the excess geometry and just keeps the angles, which is really nice because then you get a more sort of clean mesh to start with. So it still looks the same, but it's a little bit more optimized. There's less faces, and it's going to be easier to start taking stuff away. Then the next step is a little abstract, but I'm just going to run through it. So there's a thing in Blender called vertex weights, and basically, I think it's in most 3D applications. I remember similar things being 3ds Max back in the day. But basically, you can assign different weights to different vertices of your mesh. But this little trick allows you to use a texture to do that. So I'm using textures again and again and again. I love procedural textures. They make things really easy. But it also makes that if you want to change stuff or make variations, you can try things really, really quickly. So I'm just going to make an empty vertex group, and I'm going to populate that with a texture. So I'm going to add it in, and I have a tutorial exactly on this stuff, so if you want to know more about it, go check that out, because otherwise it's going to take me too long to explain. But basically what this allows me to do is have a second texture in here. I make the second one a little bit bigger, and then a lot of modifiers in here have a little vertex group which you can use, and then I can use this mask that I created to only have it affect parts of the mesh. So it'll become clear in just a second. So this mask is just going to delete polygons, and because there's no vertex group, it's going to delete all of them. But because I put that texture in, now all of a sudden I should be getting it. I forgot to put in the vertex group here. Now all of a sudden I get really interesting looking things because I'm using this second texture, and I can change it, for example, to mess with the geometry. And this is where it starts getting really fun, because the setup only takes a couple minutes, but now I can really start playing with it and seeing my end results in real time. And that's one of the reasons I really love this workflow. So with that done, we can throw on a wireframe. There we go. And now it's starting to look a little bit more like what I was doing before. But again, even if I just want to take away from this mesh, what I can do is I can mess with the contrast, for example. So I'll put a little bit more black in the texture, and it will start taking away more and more from the mesh, maybe even bring the brightness down, and there we go. Now it's just to a bare minimum. And when you start rendering stuff, it's always sort of finding the right, I guess the right balance between the two. So I'm trying to go over this as quickly as I can. I'm trying to think if I'm forgetting something. No, I'm just gonna set this up in the wireframe. Just gives them a little bit cleaner. Allows them to be a little bit cleaner. And again, even if this is too busy and I want less wires, I can always go back to my remesh a couple of steps back, change the octree depth so the sizes are a little bit bigger, and I'll get slightly bigger wireframes as well. So it's all about linking stuff together and keeping it working. And you know, it's fascinating. It works really well. There we go, something like this maybe. So let's try and light and shade this and talk a little bit about cycles and how Blender works for that kind of thing. So one of the reasons I really love it is because I can just switch to rendered view. So you can just have a rendered viewport running, and obviously to anybody using Octane or Redshift or something like that in Cinema 4D, this isn't new, but when I was coming from 3ds Max, this was kind of cool a couple of years back. So I'm going to switch over to my node editor. So you can do materials in here, but I personally prefer nodes just because I'm more used to it, and I think it's a little bit more flexible. So first thing I'm going to do is have to set up lighting before I start messing with materials. I've just put on a basic one here. But let's see. I'm just going to add a light. And I'm just going to add a sun lamp. And it's a bit of a hack, but I found these to work really well with particles because you get a very nice sort of parallel lighting, and with a lot of tiny particles layered on top of each other, you can get really nice playing of the shadows and the light, especially with a single point lighting. And if I just set it to render now, you'll see the wireframe's already lighting up, and I want to turn off my my world, so my environment. So this is where you put in HDRIs and stuff as well, just to get the lighting. So now that I have just the lighting, I'm gonna have to start turning on the dupliverts here, and unfortunately it's going to get a little bit slow, so I don't know if I'll be able to do it real time, but yeah, it's just the way it is, I guess. Let's see if I render this. Yeah, it's not too bad. I'm gonna make sure that I'm only using I'm not using the display GPU, otherwise things will get a little bit slow. There we go. All right, so let's play with the sun. Let's mess with it a little bit. You can already see you're getting a lot more dynamic sort of looking things. So just to be quick, I'm going to turn these off in the viewport, and we're just going to keep it to renders. That way I can iterate it a little more quickly, and I can answer some questions while I'm rendering as well. So I'm going to add a camera to the scene, and have my viewport here, match it. I'm just going to go for a square, basic square thing. And this is something I find really, really interesting. When you see a lot of things on the internet, people tend to not mess with their camera a lot. And focal length is one of the most, if not the most important part of your toolkit when you're doing camera work. It doesn't matter if it's real or not in real life or on a computer, your focal length really changes the way things look. So if you want like a very sort of static looking thing and you want it to look a little bit larger, you can increase the focal length, which generally people, when you think about focal length, most people just think about zooming in or out, but it actually affects the way your image looks quite a lot. So you can test this really simply. You can make a cube in Blender, Cinema 4D, whatever you use, and then create a camera, and then have, let's say, the cube fill about half of the area of your render, and then go from one end of the spectrum of focal length, so really low ones like 18, or if you want to go fisheye, even 10, 12, something like that, to super zoomed in stuff like 200, 300, 500 millimeters, and try to keep that cube the same size in your viewport, and you'll see that the higher you go up in focal length, the more your lines will start, the image flattens a little bit, and that really makes a huge difference to what straightening out a little bit image looks like. So for this one, for example, and I'll try and show you practically. So if you do a lot of these motion graphics, techie type of things, then I found that longer lenses, so more zoomed in focal lengths, tend to work a little bit better for this type of thing. So let's run a very quick render and see how quickly this does it. So this is at 85 millimeters, and if I'm going to do the same thing now, just to prove my point, at something extreme, like 18 millimeters, I'm not only going to have to zoom in, but you'll see how everything gets distorted. And whenever I'm explaining this in a classroom, 50 millimeters is called, you know, they somewhat look at it as a standard. It's close to what we see as human beings. Anything above that is a telefocus, wow, I can't think of the word. Anyway, is more zoomed in, and anything smaller than that is wider, or is a wide angle lens, which is commonly referred to. So if you look at the difference, it's exactly the same scene, but just having a different camera and different focal length makes a huge difference. So this feels really weird and awkward. Also, I didn't frame it perfectly, so there's that. But just the way this looks, it feels very unfocused. There's the lines are going all over the place, and it doesn't feel quite correct. And then when you look at something with a longer lens, now all of a sudden this feels a lot bigger, it feels a lot sturdier. It's got a lot more weight to it for some reason. So think about that stuff. Yeah, just think about that stuff in the future when you're doing these things. Camera work is really, really important. So I'm just going to go back to my focal length here. And let's see what else we can do. So we can't see the particles in this one because I've turned them off. I've only turned them on at render time, but I am going to change it to a principled shader. So the principled shader in Blender is basically like any other shader in most other applications. It's got all the different things. It's a PBR shader, and it works quite well. So I'm just going to keep this very, very simple, but I just want to show you very quickly the workflow that I usually do. Bring the sun up a little bit. And then get into showing you some compositing afterwards as well. So I think I need to move my camera just a little bit as well. Something like this maybe. And let's see if we can introduce some depth of field, because everybody loves that. So another little trick, when I'm focusing on stuff in 3D, rather than going for like the very closest point, it can be interesting to put your focus a little bit further down. So if I'm looking through the camera here, rather than having, you know, the thing that's really close, let's see, if I really overdo this, just to get an idea. I'm just gonna up my environment here so I can see what the focus is doing. So it's getting a little mucky, a little gray. Maybe just increase the wireframes a little bit. And again, it's always a back and forth. You know, you're trying different stuff, trying to get things to work. So you can see the depth of field hard at work. Do a final render real quick to see it in context. Oh, forgot to change my environment. So I'm gonna do that first. Turn it back off. Let's see if I can see some questions. So somebody asks, is dupliverts more lightweight than particle instance modifier? It's more flexible. I think the particle instance modifier does a good job, but I don't know, I just prefer having that mesh with points that I can then start, because I can displace that and start doing stuff to that as well without having to deal with all the, all the geometry of the dupliverts. So that's kind of why I use those. So is there a page with a different expression syntax for the driver? There is one somewhere, but I'd have to look for it myself. But then I know I can show you guys this maybe really quickly if I have a Chrome window open. Let's see if I can find the right tutorial here. Tutorials, Blender, variations. Oh, wrong window. So this is one I refer to quite a bit. It's a tutorial in Vimeo, so I don't know how visible the link is, but people can pause it if they... It talks about how to make marbles in Blender using drivers and having each one of them variate. And he talks a little bit about creating your own custom like functions and stuff that you can use. So that's really cool. It's a really good video. So if you want to get started with them, I would look into that. So our render's done in the meantime, and it's nothing special, but it'll do the job for now. Do one more re-render and then show you my compositing process a little bit. There we go. Usually I'll mess a little bit more with lighting and stuff, but it's just sort of more an introduction on how to do it, and maybe, you know, for some people to have a look at Blender and see how that works. So the cool thing is I'm back in my node editor, and this is my my thingy from previously, my material. Wow, it's getting really warm in here. So I can switch over to my node editor, and this is something that I was talking about earlier that I really like. Now I'm compositing that same image, so I didn't have to move over to After Effects. I didn't have to change anything. I just in Blender, and I can just keep going. So this works like any other node-based compositor. So I can add in, you know, some curves, for example. So I can start bringing this up and messing with the colors and things like that. But yeah, I'm not going to get into this too much, but it's just to show you that I do stuff in here as well. And I'll open some of the final files now so you can get an idea of how they worked. And if I've missed anything, I can get it from there. So I throw them in here somewhere. I have to find the right version. Let's see, which one can I open? I think those two, so 3 and 4 would be the most interesting. All right, so this was split up into 2 windows. Can I go back? There we are. So this is the final file, and let's see if I can turn off the dots here because they're what's making this so slow. There we go. So this is the setup for the particles. So again, same idea. It's just multiple ones, and I doubt it'll run because I've turned them off, and I don't know how well they're going to run. So I'm going to leave them off. But again, just to run through it. Same thing with the drag and the different settings in here. I messed with the different settings within the fluid to get some more interesting shapes. Then same deal here. I cache them out and just have a mesh full of points. And again, it's really slow, but
Hey,
that's what you get for trying stuff.
we have a few questions from the community. I think I will tell them. So someone is asking what kind of commercial work you do with Blender.
Okay.
Do you have examples? Because I see on your website it's mostly personal projects.
Yeah, that's a very driven choice on my end. One of the reasons for that was that I wasn't happy with the type of commercial work that I was doing a few years ago. It was a bit, you know, boring is the wrong word, but it's not the most exciting content, I guess. It's good work and it's interesting, but nowadays, though, the result of that is that I do a lot of work for visuals. So I'm finishing up a really big project, for example, for a nightclub in China that needed a whole bunch of visuals, and that's through a company in the Netherlands. So they found me through Instagram and saw my work, and they wanted me to be part of the team. So I worked together with 3 other people on creating visuals for the club. So that's really cool. I've done a number of visuals for DJs. I've done album covers. I've done all kinds of things, really. And there's still a number of jobs that I do for local studios here in Antwerp that are still a little bit more corporate. So they're generally more meant for internal usage or at like a convention or something like that. So it's a mix of both. It's on the one hand, I have the really exciting, cool stuff that I do with musicians and DJs and bands and all that stuff. And on the other hand, there's the more sort of, you know, the more steady jobs, I guess you would call them. And like recently I was doing one for a bicycle helmet. So I got a CAD model from a bicycle helmet, and then my job, because they have people that are okay with 3D, but I'm a little bit more specialized, so some of the harder things I end up doing, and I'll help in the concept phase as well, trying to get ideas out. So it's a bit of both, honestly, but most of the time it's that kind of thing. And some visual effects work. I recently did something where I had to add an extra block of apartment buildings to the cathedral here in Antwerp. It was like an April Fool's video for a big like housing development company. So it's very varied actually, but I do it almost all exclusively with Blender. The only, is my screen still visible or?
Actually, I was on your website, but I can.
Okay, no worries. It's fine. No, I don't necessarily have to show it. The only application I probably use the most outside of Blender is called Kdenlive Live, which is an open source video editor. So Blender is also able to edit videos. It can do so many things. It's crazy, but it's not the easiest one to work with. And I found Kdenlive Live to be closer to Premiere, which is what I'm used to. So I made the switch to that. So if I'm editing, I'm usually using Kdenlive Live. But for pretty much everything else, I'm using Blender for all the commercial work as well. But I don't post it as much because I want my personal work to be the things that get clients interested, because they'll be more inclined to ask for things which are more my style that I've created. So.
Yeah, I'm currently on the Blender website under the feature tab, and yeah, it looks very powerful.
It is. I think the last few years have been very, very good for Blender, and there's a new version coming out which they're working on really hard right now, which is going to have like the built-in real-time viewport and stuff, and it's really incredible to be able to use every new feature the moment they implement it. So you can also download daily builds, which are experimental and they might not always work perfectly. But I've used them sometimes in production if I need certain things. Generally, it's when cycles get certain improvements that I try to use the daily builds. And like recently, something that isn't in this version yet, but will be in the next version that I've been testing, is adaptive sampling, which has been put into a number of renders at this point. And like, especially with the kind of thing I've been doing lately, a lot of reflections and things, sometimes it's like a quarter, 3/4 of the render time, or even half of the render time in certain scenes, and it's gone even crazier on some other ones. So it's really cool to be able to look at that stuff and instantly try it out and see if it's valuable or not. That's something I really like about it.
Yeah, and I saw some features that looks exciting, like the displacement modifier looks really more powerful than the C4D one. Actually, C4D have a lot of he's late because they are rewriting their core for 6 years, so a lot of things are not on point.
Right. Every 3D application has its strengths and weaknesses, though. I mean, but no, the displacement in cycles right now in Blender 2.79 is experimental and it works, but it's not super optimized. But in the new version, vector displacement works, and the previewing in the viewport works a lot quicker as well, and it's better optimized. And yeah, it's cool. Like, there's not a lot of features that I miss from having worked with like super proprietary stuff for a long time. Like I worked with Creative Cloud and like Photoshop, After Effects, that kind of thing for it's weird switch, God knows how long. But with Blender, definitely, it's one of the few applications where I don't feel like I'm missing that much at all. Everything works pretty well that's in there. And even the fluid particles and things, which I abuse to do crazy things with, it's all in there. So it's fun to have a really diverse toolkit.
Yeah, so maybe you want to show a few more things on your Blender?
Sure. Tell me when the screen is still active.
Yeah, we are back on the screen.
Okay, cool. So I'll go back to this one real quick. And if we look at the, is it still up here? Yeah, so if we look at this one, you can see there's sort of an additional pattern going on within the fluid sim. And that's one of the reasons I don't know how visible it's going to be, but it's one of the reasons I convert this over to like a vertex cloud, because it allows me to add modifiers on top of that again as well, and I can redo the whole process and add even more stuff. So here you'll see, if I exaggerate it, there's actually a displace modifier on it, which, ooh, that's too much. Let's see if I can get it to look sort of interesting. There you go. So now I can start displacing these even further, and if I were to render this, then I can get really interesting looking things. And I think that's about it. We'll open the other one as well, because there was something about that one that I wanted to show. Again, for the same technique. Now, these always take a while to open. And again, you see similar things, but this mesh, for example, has got really crazy, weird topology. And you can see once you get going with these modifiers, there's so many on them. So it might be interesting to just solo this out and then show you how it's built up from start to finish. So I'm just going to turn off all the modifiers and then activate them one by one and give a little bit of a explanation as well. So first thing is just subsurf, which is same deal as any subdivision thing, or hypernerves. Is it still called hypernerves in Cinema 4D? I remember it being called that, but anyway. And then I'm doing the same thing here that I was doing before, where basically I'm assigning two of these vertex groups. I'm putting vertices in those groups with textures. So I'm just going to keep those closed, and then I can use those in different ways. So first thing I'm going to do is mask it out. So again, you get the same thing that I was doing before. And again, it's driven by these two textures. This is the first one, and this is the second one. So if I would change this one, for example, to like 1.5, then you'll see the size actually change. It should. Maybe it's the wrong one. Ah, there we go. There we go. So you can see the sizes change just by masking it out. Then I'm going to decimate that. So again, the decimation can be done within a mask. So I can use different parts of the mesh to be decimated, so you get more interesting workflows going. So you get sort of a polygon look and then sort of a decimated look running through each other. Decimated even more because good topology is a motion designer's enemy, especially when you're trying to do weird things. And again, I'm always thinking in function of the final form. I know I want this to be a wireframe. I want it to have interesting lines and intricate looking patterns. So, and then I'm going to smooth it out. So smooth is just like any other smooth operator. It'll just relax it or smooth it depending on the 3D application. And you can do this in separate axes and things. And this is why I like this, because I can just hit buttons, and a lot of really cool project and ideas have come from wanting to try a new tool or looking at a modifier and being like, hey, I've never really, and you start clicking on them and things start happening and ideas sort of start popping up around that, which is a very fun way to work. Then I'm going to wireframe that, but this already looks really cool further, and smooth it out. And if you smooth out a wireframe, you get these really cool organic looking things. And then I decided to wireframe that again. So now, if I just turn this back off, because I've pushed these out, I get really crazy looking edges. And a lot of this is about breaking the rules of topology as well. And then there we go, wireframe it again. And at the very end, I'll add in a subsurf modifier, which I'm not enabling in the viewport because it's going to bog everything down, but it's just going to smooth out these lines. And even in the wireframe modifier, for example, I have control over how much it's going to smooth out all these different points and angles. But basically, yeah, that's it. And it's a really fun and interesting way to combine things and get creative. So I think that's pretty much it for these. Yeah, if people are interested, now is the time to ask a couple more questions, I think, and we should be pretty good after that, unless you have some other stuff in mind still. Sure.
Maybe you can go back with your face. I have the mic disabled on OBS. That's why I asked the second time.
Oh, okay, no problem. Yeah, that's fine. We can finish up. So, question time. Wow, it's incredibly warm in here at this point, so my apologies.
No question at the moment.
No questions. Oh, that's either a really good thing or a really bad thing.
That's because you already tell us everything.
Who knows? Let's have a quick look through some of the stuff. So somebody says, I think that Blender and Houdini can be awesome. I'm honestly just waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect job to really dive into Houdini. I've used it a little bit and I think it's really cool. And the way it does things is incredibly powerful. But for simple tasks, I still think it's easier to use a more traditional 3D package with like basic, the normal tools that you're used to. But for creating just like crazy, abstract, insane stuff, Houdini is definitely on the docket, hopefully. So, all right. Is there? Okay. Let's see.
Specific add-on.
Yeah, specific add-on. I'm gonna recommend a few of them, I guess. So the first one is the Manuel Bastioni lab that I showed earlier for creating the people. That I use quite a lot. Then animation nodes. I don't know if people here have heard of it. Animation nodes is, I like to think of it as like the love child of Espresso and Houdini within Blender. So what it allows you to do is it allows you to do a node-based sort of workflow. And I don't know why the node isn't showing up, but it allows you to do sort of a node-based workflow within Blender. So you can do same kind of things with building arrays with nodes and doing motion graphics type stuff. So it's kind of interesting. How does Houdini work compared with Blender? Yeah, Houdini is just very node-based. It's getting more and more traditional sort of 3D tools, but it started out as a VFX package, so it's extremely good at complex simulations and putting everything together and all that kind of stuff. So,
I see your screen share. Maybe you can disable it and go back.
Okay. Screen share. Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Cool.
There is one question about the Blender stability.
Oh yeah, does my Blender crash a lot? I don't think more or less than other applications, but from my experience with 3ds Max, and I'm not like trying to harp on 3ds Max at all because it's a great application and I really enjoyed using it when I did, but I feel when Blender crashes, it's more clear to me why. Like I've noticed that, you know, if I go too far in the subdivisions, then yeah, I know what I did wrong to make it crash a little bit more clearly than from what I remember with 3ds Max at least. And there's quirks here and there, but in general, it's incredibly stable for me. And the great thing is the autosave system is really good. It autosaves by default every 2 minutes, so it's really hard to actually lose work. And the normal behavior is that when you save a blend file, it automatically backs up the previous version that was there. So you always have the current version and the previous version. So even if something goes corrupt or something goes wrong, not that I've had it, but just in case, it's actually very well structured. So
Few other question. What's your plan for the future, and will you release some sci-fi short movie?
um, I've been working on a short film project for a number of years now with a friend and my brother, which is still going, but it's very slow because we're all doing it in our free time, and it's not really at a stage anywhere where I could even show something. We're still very conceptual, but that would be for me the dream would to be to do a full short film. Yeah, so a lot of sci-fi, motion graphics and stuff. And then, but it really depends. I should be doing the titles again for the Digital Art Conference in Frankfurt, and I'll be speaking there in October as well. So if there's people from Germany or from that area, you know, try and get in on it. It's called it's just called the Digital Art Conference Frankfurt, and it was first time around was last year, so this will be the second time. I did the titles last year, and I was lucky enough to win a prize with them, and then this year I'm going to try and do them again, probably together with my brother. We're going to really try and push it and see how far we can go. And then for the future, I hope to someday open a school, but I don't know how close or how far that is. I have worked in a school in the past, and I really enjoyed that, and I really enjoyed teaching. But for now, the freelancing is going really well, so I'm going to do that for another while, and you know, save up some money to do something bigger. I guess that's the main thing.
We have another question, two other questions. One sounds obvious, like do you play guitar? And another question is there anything new in Blender that you are excited about?
Okay. So yeah, probably people noticed the guitars here behind me. I used to play guitar a lot more than I do now. I still make music, but mostly digitally. But every now and again, I'll have some fun and play some crappy guitar because I was never really good. But I do enjoy it every now and then. But it's more far and few between. I'm too obsessed with the whole computer thing for the most part. But I used to play in a band and stuff. That's a long time ago. But for some projects, I'll try and do some music. Because I have two brothers that are younger than me, but one of them is also a motion designer and visual effects artist, and the other is a musician. So our dream is to eventually all work together. But yeah, and then Blender stuff that I'm excited about, a lot, honestly. I think the new Blender version is going to be seriously kick-ass. They're updating a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily bad in this version, but when you see the difference in what it's going to be like, it looks like it's going to be a lot more accessible, I think, to people. This is going to be all around. I'm just really, really excited for the new version. And the moment everything is implemented that I use a lot, I'm definitely going to switch over, no matter how experimental and crazy it might be. But most of the things, I'm always really excited about the rendering things. Eevee, obviously, there's a lot of hype around it, but it's, you know, it is a real-time render engine. So there's always going to be some limitations, but it's going to be fun exploring those and seeing how to get around them, I think. So I'm more excited for that than the existence of it itself, more just to kind of look at it and see what I can use it for within my workflow. And then generally hyped about like the boring workflow collection system. I'm in like stuff, so I might not be the right person to ask. In like obscure cycles render, I've been using Blender for like features and things like that.
There are
Like 10 years.
a few questions back.
Just excited for the project going to be a part of it now. A lot of those workflows sort of thing. As the community and how they approach it and how it does things, and to kind of see that, if I'm honest. So, new school Blender guy, bit of a excited about Blender itself as the community, if I'm honest. So, bit of a
that's going to, because we can do it like all the night.
Yeah, otherwise we're just gonna keep going.
So will you talk at Blender conference, and will you stream again? And the crowd render, you are in latest question is crowd render. You are in
I know.
Into it and
Will I speak at the Blender conference? That's obviously up to the people over at Blender. I will do a submission because I really enjoyed speaking there last year. So hopefully, yes, but I can't promise that because it's up to them. But if I can make my talk interesting enough, I think there's a pretty good chance that I can be there. And what was the other question? Oh, will I stream more? Yes, I'm going to try and stream as much as I can. Sometimes you'll get like 2 streams in 2 weeks, but sometimes there might be a month or even 2 months between them, depending on how busy I get. So, but I will keep making content as much as I can. And I have whatchamacallit, sort of a tutorial series called Weird Shit. And it's all about just doing stuff in Blender that you're not supposed to do and getting cool stuff from it. And I am planning on moving that forward. I haven't done episodes in a while, but yeah, definitely gonna do that. And I completely blanked on the very last part of that question. Oh, crowd render. So yeah, crowd render is an add-on being developed by a number of guys in Australia. I've been on like the alpha beta team for a while now. It's really cool. It's a plugin that easily allows you to get every CPU and GPU in your house and get it to render on your one computer. So it works really well at the moment. They had a crowdfunding campaign that unfortunately didn't go too well, but they still plan on developing it. I'm only testing it or anything, but when everything works, it seems like I'm one of the people they send it to break it, because I usually make scenes that tend to break stuff that needs to transfer data and files because I just kind of do my thing. So I hope they. But it's a cool project. It's cool to see that you can not only grab all your computers from all around, but then you can add Amazon AWS nodes with them into it, and you'll be able to. I think I've used it on a job once or twice, and it's really cool to be able to grab your laptop, go over there, and then I use a VPN to connect my computer here at home with my computer at the studio that I'm working in, and then I can use the render power of this computer and even both the computers here in my office. That was really this. On my laptop, the production quality of a client, I can work there and it shouldn't be used for anything else than modeling. My laptop, which is way too old, what I find at this point. So I want to try it out more. And it's free right now. Tell people to check it out. It's still in an alpha stage, but it works quite well already. So
thank you guys for watching the live, and it was a pretty great moment. The thing is, if you want description, you can try Blender, and I think you will find great resource. Be sure to follow also the Mantissa on Instagram, and of course Behance and all kind of social medias, because the work is really nice. Thanks for being an awesome community. Probably see you next time for new videos, maybe tips, maybe critique my works, and
cool. Yeah, I'm happy to do more if you're interested. So, and I want to thank everybody that watched the stream as well. Thank you for bringing. It's been awesome, and thank you as well.
So goodbye.
Bye, everybody.